I married a woman who had ended an abusive relationship, but on my birthday, her daughter got me a card that read, "I hope you Delaware, and I hate you for marrying my mother Darlene, 45F and I Jason 46M married about 2 years ago, and I have to say that it was one of the best decisions I've made." However, none of us, particularly Darlene, found it simple to get here. She had spent more than 15 years with her ex-husband Tom, 49M, and had been through a lot together during their previous marriage. And in my perspective, 15 years was too long. Tom was the embodiment of a toxic and emotionally abusive marriage. He was a real piece of work. Darlene's discussion of her upbringing indicated that Tom had a considerable negative influence on her. Even if they weren't physical wounds, you could see the scars he left on her. Yet she is the most beautiful person. She told me about him immediately away, alleging he made fun of her in front of others. Darlene once shared a story to her pals over dinner about something that had happened at work. In the midst of her story, Tom smiled and interrupted, adding, "Oh, Darlene is so important at her job. No one would ever get their coffee if she didn't show up. Do you know how embarrassing it must have been for her?" Naturally, he dismissed it as a joke, but everyone knew it was designed to cause harm. Darlene told me she just wanted to go at that time. The worst part, however, was how he controlled her whole existence. He wanted to know who she was calling and where she was going at all times, even if she was only a few minutes late getting home. He was suspicious and accused her of cheating whenever she chatted with another man, even if it was simply the supermarket clerk. He'd question and punish her, as if she were breaking the law. She once phoned him to inform him that she would be late because her car had broken down on the way home from work. Rather of being helpful or compassionate, he accused her of lying. I'll tell you what, the gaslighting was quite clever. When Darlene challenged him about his activities, he tried to make her feel awful about herself by twisting the matter. He'd remark things like, "You're overly sensitive," or "You're imagining things." There was one occasion she spotted him eating lunch with another lady and challenged him. Despite the fact that the evidence was clear, he dismissed her as neurotic and insecure. He convinced her that she was overreacting, and she apologized to him. Can you believe it? I believe one of the most upsetting things she told me was how he made her feel useless every time she attempted to leave. Darlene is a strong lady who has attempted several times to get away from him. But Tom would put her down, telling her things like, "You'll never find anyone better than me, and no one else will want you after all these years." He convinced her that she didn't deserve better. So she stayed for nearly 15 years, believing his falsehoods. I met Darlene while she was still married to Tom. We were both members of a local walking club, and that is where it all began. We'd meet each other on these walks on a regular basis, and we gradually became friends. She was easy to chat to and made you feel comfortable straight immediately. It wasn't long before our friendship developed into something very valuable to both of us. We'd talk about everything on those walks, from our favorite movies to more intimate topics like our families and the difficulties we'd faced. But of course, Tom didn't like it. He had this strong envy that was clear from the beginning. At first, I couldn't understand why Darlene would go silent for days at a time. She would abruptly stop responding to my texts or fail to attend our walking group sessions. I was perplexed and a little wounded. But I assumed she had her reasons. She eventually informed me that Tom had an issue with our friendship. He would become enraged if he found out we were conversing or she was out strolling with the group, especially if I was present. He accused her of having feelings for me, while she didn't. We were honestly just friends, but in Tom's twisted mentality, any male who showed her interest was a danger. Darlene and I had just finished a stroll, and we dropped by a cafe to get some coffee. It was all harmless. We were simply discussing how wonderful the weather was and making small conversation. However, someone Tom knew saw us and relayed it to him later. Darlene had vanished for nearly a month before I realized it. When she returned, she informed me that Tom had gone off the tracks, accusing her of cheating and demanded that she cease communicating to me completely. He went so far as to grab her vehicle keys. The mere fact that we loved one another's presence irritated him. What truly struck me was how she apologized every time she drew away. She'd say things like, "I'm sorry, Jason, I just can't deal with the drama at home right now." She was clearly attempting to avoid conflict, but it crushed my heart to watch her so constrained. I attempted to comfort her, assuring her that I'd be available whenever she was ready to return, and that there was no rush. However, it was clear that the situation with Tom was eating her alive. The more I understood about Tom and his conduct, the more I felt protective of Darlene. She did not deserve any of it. She was always very nice and caring, going out of her way to make sure everyone else was okay, even while she was suffering through so much. Tom's fears and control concerns caused her to be dragged away from her favorite activities, which made it even more agonizing. After one too many of these occurrences, Darlene began to speak up more about her relationship with Tom. She informed me about the repeated charges, the disparaging remarks, and how he'd twist things to make her feel like she was in the wrong. It was evident that this wasn't just about me. Tom was a poisonous influence in many aspects of her life. He'd isolate her from her friends, insult her appearance, cuisine, and job, everything. He was gradually eroding away at her self-esteem, making her believe she couldn't do anything correctly. Leaving Tom was the most difficult thing Darlene had ever had to do. After 15 years of putting up with his controlling and violent behavior, she had finally had enough. And strangely, the straw that broke the camel's back was as easy as oversalting the dish. On this particular day, nothing seemed to go as planned. Darlene was hurrying to get supper on the table after a busy day, and she accidentally oversalted the dish. It wasn't really that horrible, really, but Tom lost it. He began shouting at her, calling her names, and treating her like she was the worst wife in the world. But this time, something inside Darlene simply clicked. She didn't argue back or try to defend herself, as she normally did. She simply sat there silently, soaking everything in. I believe that's when she realized she couldn't do it anymore. The following day, when Tom was at work, she packed her belongings and went. She didn't know where else to go, so she asked me for aid. When she arrived at my door, she appeared weary, as if she hadn't slept in weeks. I didn't hesitate for a second, and I took her in without doubt. The next few months were extremely difficult as she worked through the divorce procedure. I've never seen someone so worn down by life. Darlene was a shell of herself, yet she remained determined. She knew she deserved more. She struggled to see it at times. Each day presented a new difficulty. Tom wasn't making the divorce easy. He attempted to draw it out as long as possible, perhaps expecting she would reconsider and return to him. But Darlene held firm, even though it was ripping her apart. She was coping with a lot at once. Not only was she having to reconstruct her life after leaving Tom, but she also had to deal with her daughter, Linda, 20F, who was only 15 at the time. Linda had always been closer to Tom, or so it appeared. She admired her father and couldn't understand why her mother had abandoned him so abruptly. Darlene's eyes were filled with anguish whenever Linda called, sobbing and questioning why the family had been split up. Linda felt betrayed, as though her mother had abandoned her and their family without warning. Darlene was sitting at my kitchen table one night, holding her phone and crying. She had just gotten off the phone with Linda, who had asked her again to return home. Linda had no idea what was going on between her parents. How could she? Tom had taken care to keep up appearances in front of her. He was always the adoring parent when Linda was there, but he was a different guy behind closed doors. Darlene had attempted to explain to Linda why she needed to leave, but it was difficult for a 15-year-old to grasp the complexity of an abusive marriage. I did my best to help Darlene through everything, but I could tell she was struggling. She felt horrible about leaving Linda behind, while knowing it was the best thing to do for her own sanity. She was consumed with remorse and worried about Linda's emotional well-being. It didn't help that Tom was telling Linda falsehoods and attempting to cast Darlene as the culprit in all of this. He'd tell her things like, "Your mother doesn't care about us anymore," or "She left because she wanted to be with Tom," which were utter lies. But Linda was young and bewildered, and she had no idea who to believe. Linda disliked me because of this, even before I started dating Darlene. It didn't matter that I had supported her mother through some of her most difficult moments. Linda saw me as the one who wrecked everything by putting her parents at odds. So, when Darlene and I began dating about a year ago, Linda wasn't delighted. Darlene and I had known one other for several years, so when we decided to make our relationship official, it seemed very natural. We married in a few months, which may sound rushed to others, but it felt perfect for us. We were overjoyed. And for the first time in a long time, Darlene was too, but Linda still despised me. She declined to attend our wedding, which was very difficult for Darlene. I could tell it affected her greatly, but she attempted to dismiss it, claiming Linda simply needed time to adjust. I was expecting that once she realized how happy her mother was, she would come around, but that did not happen. Linda remained silent, only speaking to us when absolutely necessary. Darlene lost her job approximately a year ago.